Welcome to English Through History. As always, if you enjoy the content, please subscribe. Helps us to make more content and it shows us we're going in the right direction. In today's episode, we are looking at Hong Kong. These tiny islands, of which there are more than 250, have been the center of many international disputes, ownership, and political tensions even to the current day. We'll examine the history of ownership, industry, and its place in geopolitics. As always, we'll look to debunk some of the myths around the island. Due to the sensitive nature of the status of Hong Kong, some things reported here are disputed. History, much like politics, is subject to opposing views. I'd encourage you to do further reading on the subject from a broad range of sources. Here at English Through History, we do extensive research into a topic, and we only talk about information from various sources. We try to remain neutral, and we just talk about the facts that we know. We are all trained historians, but of course, even historians can differ in their interpretation of events. Anyway, on with the show, and I hope you enjoy the episode. The islands, lying just south of what is the Chinese mainland, have been inhabited for a long time, contributing to the fishing and salt industries. The islands belonged to various Chinese dynasties until 1842, when in order to expedite the end of the First Opium Wars with Great Britain, the Qing dynasty ceded control to the British under the Treaty of Nanjing. The earliest known human activity in the region dates back to the Neolithic era around 6,000 years ago. The area that is now Hong Kong was inhabited by a number of indigenous tribes, including the Punti, the Tanka, and the Hoklo people. In the 3rd century BC, the area came under the control of the Qin dynasty, which ruled over much of China at the time. Over the centuries, the region was ruled by a number of different Chinese dynasties, including the Han, the Tang, and the Song. During the Ming dynasty of 1368 to 1644, the area became an important trading center, with many merchants from Europe and the Middle East traveling to the region to trade goods such as silk, tea, and porcelain. One of the most important factors in Hong Kong's history has been its status as a colonial territory. From 1842 until 1997, Hong Kong was ruled by the British, who used the city as a trading and military outpost in Asia. During this time, Hong Kong developed into a major financial center and international trade hub with a population of over 7 million people. The British also brought many aspects of Western culture to Hong Kong, including the English language education, sports like football and rugby, and a legal system based on English common law. During the Japanese invasion of mainland China, Hong Kong was occupied by the Japanese military, who, like much of mainland China, implemented harsh policies on the citizens. The economy crashed and thousands of people were subjugated and killed. Starvation, famine, and torture were commonplace in the 3 years the Japanese military were there. Eventually, the islands were liberated by the Allied and Chinese troops. By this point, the population had shrunk to half. Hong Kong began to rebuild under British rule to once more become a prosperous place for many of its citizens, due in main to an influx of migrants from mainland China that were leaving the country during Chairman Mao's reign. However, British rule was not without its challenges, and there were many tensions and conflicts over the years between the British authorities and the people of Hong Kong. For example, in the 1960s, there were protests and riots against the British colonial government, led by a group of left-wing activists known as the Hong Kong and Kowloon Committee for Anti-Hong Kong British Persecution Struggle. These protests were part of a wider wave of anti-colonial sentiment around the world, and they helped to pave the way for greater political freedoms and autonomy in Hong Kong. In 1984, the British and Chinese governments signed a treaty that would eventually lead to the return of Hong Kong to Chinese control in 1997. Under the terms of this treaty, Hong Kong would become a special administrative region, or SAR, of China, with a high degree of autonomy and a separate legal and economic system from the mainland. This arrangement was known as One Country, Two Systems, and it was intended to ensure that Hong Kong would continue to be a prosperous and stable city even after the end of British rule. Since the handover in 1997, Hong Kong has been governed under the Basic Law, a document that outlines the rights and responsibilities of the SAR and its relationship with the Chinese government. Under the Basic Law, Hong Kong is supposed to have a high degree of autonomy and the freedom to maintain its own economic and legal systems, as well as a separate political system with its own elected legislature and chief executive. However, there have been many challenges to this system in recent years as the Chinese government has sought to exert more control over Hong Kong and its people. In recent years, there have been many other protests and movements in Hong Kong that have been driven by younger people. For example, in 2019, there were massive protests against a proposed extradition law that would have allowed people to be sent from Hong Kong to mainland China for trial. Okay, let's look at some of the myths around Hong Kong. We're really going to explore one prevalent myth. And that myth is that Hong Kong was or is an independent city-state or its own country. The reality is Hong Kong is technically a special administrative region of China, similar in status to Macau, comprising not just the bustling urban area of Hong Kong Island, but also the Kowloon Peninsula, the New Territories, and several outlying islands. It has never been an independent country, nor has it been a city-state. Often compared to Singapore, Hong Kong has always been under the control of either the British or the Chinese. Singapore itself broke away from first the British and then the Malaysians to become independent in the 1960s, but Hong Kong never did this. The image we have of towering buildings and an imposing urban sprawl is only part of the islands. While Hong Kong is indeed one of the most densely populated places on Earth, it also boasts extensive natural landscapes and a rich cultural heritage.